Kyle, are you still with us?
Yep.
All right. The application of environmental test standards. Customers and product suppliers both use environmental test standards to protect their best interests. What a lot of people don't realize, for instance, in 810, and I'm not sure how many others do this, the premise of 810 testing is that ESS has already been run at the manufacturing site. Because people will ask, why isn't ESS in 810? Because they expect it to be the manufacturer's responsibility. So this is where the product supplier is paying attention to the environments before they even pass it on to the buyer. Uncoordinated or inappropriate application of standards defeats their purpose. In fact, it can make it worse than it would have been without them. Users need criteria for evaluating a standard's utility. Now, you can evaluate all you like. That doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to change. But it's good to at least take a look at what's going on. Is it technically honest? What do you think technically honest means? Kyle?
Am I who you go to when no one else answers in the class?
Yes, that's what you get for not being here.
I would assume that technically honest means that you're evaluating the spec to apply in a way that's commensurate with good engineering judgment.
Very good. That's a good answer. It also includes things like specs asking for things that are physically impossible, like 95% humidity at 105 degrees C. So that's part of technically honest. Not all spec writers, okay, for environmental test specs, not all of the writers are testers. Sometimes you have manufacturers on the team. There's nothing wrong with that. On my IEC team, we had half users, half manufacturers. And there were times as manufacturers we would say, that's physically impossible for us to do. Okay, because they wanted things that chambers just weren't capable of and never could be. In other cases, I mean, we kept them honest that way, technically honest. In other cases, the users were making use of the equipment in ways we never knew about, which gave us better ideas. So we helped to keep each other honest. If it would have been imbalanced, and it was all manufacturers, for instance, it's too easy to write it so it's easy for the manufacturer. Does the specification encourage the involvement of technical specialists? Does it recognize the need to systematically involve all concerned technical disciplines? Okay, so that would include designers, manufacturers, if you have a specialist in soldering, you know, whatever types of specialists you need. And does it support the application of sound business practices for both customer and supplier? In the military world, that means, does it really work when you sell it to somebody? Isn't it sad we have to think about things like that? But we've heard stories like the Kevlar vests that don't stop the list. So is the standard technically honest? This is where we need the involvement of technical specialists. Does it discourage the premature specification of rigid test parameters or profiles? And does it present simplistic matrices of predefined test conditions? You can't always just look at a table and say, okay, this is the best way. Now, I've seen a lot of multiple choice things. You can do it A, B, C, or D, and it's like, but none of them completely fit. Okay, that becomes a simplistic matrix, and you don't want to be stuck with something like that. Some of the issues, make sure nothing is based on magic numbers. It should be based on scientific rationale. Are environmental requirements defined in terms of input loads or product responses? What kind of testing do you think this is most important for? Yeah.
I support.
Okay, I didn't. That's true, but I didn't phrase the question well enough. Vibration. Okay, it's more important than almost any other because there's so many differences between input and response.
Absolutely, yes.
And so you need to know your control, your type of control before you start. Am I controlling by the input? So typically you measure off the table, or am I controlling off of the product response? In HALT, you control off the product response. Our environmental requirements defined in terms of input loads or product responses covers that. It can also be true of temperature, just to make sure that something is really caught up to the temperature that you've set for the chamber air. Are there unstated factors of conservatism? This is when we're going to test it extra hard. And then maybe we add margins to it, not realizing that it was already conservative levels. Are there alternative stress application methodologies? Reshaping spectra or profiles, raising or lowering load levels, expanding or narrowing load ranges or bandwidths, increasing or decreasing rates of change. If you do a rapid temperature change rate, this is when it's most beneficial to find flaws for most things because you have the different rates of expansion and contraction. The thermal differences will actually twist and turn it. If you're looking for solder creep, go slow. Okay, that is one of the main areas where you actually would want to slow the temperature change rate down. You will not pick it up with fast temperature change rates. So just simply knowing how your product would respond to things is a big help. How is management involved? Most of us that have management would say we would like that to be as little as possible. It is desirable to validate test effectiveness early in the product development cycle. We want to take back good results to the manager. What we think of as good results, he may not. Because we might say, yeah, this is a good screen. It's picking things up. Where in his mind, good results is everything passed. And that's where technical honesty comes in as well. Good reporting of what actually happened. You want early margin and validation testing so that you don't have surprises that cost a whole bunch of money later on. Your management should commit to involving all technical specialties and providing time, funds, and assets to perform early testing. Try to remember there's a sign on somebody's wall at work, just a handmade sign, but it's something like time, money, reliability. You can have 2 out of the 3. Because it's hard to have all of those come together at the same time, just because of general economy for business. Document wording does not take the place of management commitment or compensate for its absence. Your management should understand the importance of test. When there was the financial crisis back when Silicon Valley basically disappeared for a while, all the dot-coms went under, the first thing that people tended to cut was they would close down their test lab because it was expensive to test. Well, guess what happened to their warranties within the next year? Okay, it was terrible for them. The cost of getting rid of the testers was disastrous for some companies. So while testing is expensive, it's typically a lot less expensive than finding out that your ignitions catch on fire later on down the line. Do you have existing test facilities, and are they adequate? And this is where I recommend to people, if you don't have adequate, don't buy new equipment. Go to a test lab. Places like Qualtest, which is no longer Qualtest. But they had equipment I would never spend the money for, just because I wouldn't use it enough. Okay, and you've got a shaker, right? Only one? Yeah. So if you needed a bigger one, what would you do?
I go across town.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people are doing now, where it used to be, if you needed a piece of equipment, you'd go ask the boss and say, I really need this, and the boss would say, okay. Okay, now it's less expensive to have someone else do it. And I know one of the buildings, ITT in Edison, New Jersey, they actually, they had, I don't even remember, 40 or 50 chambers at least, and most of them were standing idle. And I mean, they had huge shaker heads in the floor. I mean, you could have stuck a washing machine on it and lowered the chamber over it. You know, they had great facilities. And so they would ask me, if I had a customer call in asking where a good test lab was, to send them to ITT. They were making extra money that way by hiring out time on their unused equipment. So, I mean, there's lots of clever ways to get out of having to spend too much money. But I'm going to tell you, if you want somebody else to do your testing, watch it. You need a test witness there. I actually caught someone who had done some testing. They had a sheet of paper that they handed me and said, see, we tested it. And I could tell it was Xeroxed because the bottom numbers were cut in half. And I had worked with this guy. I really enjoyed him, and I couldn't believe he did this. So I handed it back, and I said, no, you copied this on the copy machine. And then he looked ashamed. I said, do it again, and when you do it, you make your marks in blue pen. Okay, because that way I knew that he couldn't pass through a copy that he just happened to line up better. I wish I would have been there for the entire test instead of only seeing it at the end. Testers, like anybody, we get pushed for time, and not everybody has a lot of integrity. Okay? That each person would have their own reasons for it, but that's why I would witness the testing myself or send somebody that I knew would do it. Even things as simple as sensor location. If the sensor's in the wrong place, you could have a pass that should have been a fail or vice versa. Sound business practice issues. Do the standard or requirements documents encourage or even allow a supplier to do the best job he is capable of? Sometimes you get stuck with a test where your hands are just tied behind your back. You know, I've done tests like that where I've got the customer standing next to me saying, nope, this is what it says. My manager says you will do what this says, and it's okay, but I want you to understand this is basically an invalid test. And you just have to go through with it. Are requirements documents and proposals prepared and evaluated by the appropriate technical specialists? Wouldn't it be great if when somebody was making a proposal, like your salesperson, and they're writing up a proposal saying these are the tests we can do and this is how we can do it, wouldn't it be nice if they came to you to verify it? How often does that happen? In your dreams. But that would be a good way to work it, to make sure that nobody's claiming that you can do more than you're actually capable of. Does everybody win? No, it's great if everybody does have a win-win-win situation. It doesn't always work that way, and sometimes it's just because we don't know how. The real test of the utility of an environmental test standard is whether both the customer and supplier come out ahead. The customer benefits from the delivery of defect-free hardware. The benefits are enhanced when the supplier is encouraged to use creativity and expertise. Supplier benefits by eliminating hidden factory costs, which includes rework right on the site, making the best use of existing assets, minimizing impact on existing business relations, and improved profitability. And sometimes this includes safety for the end user. Okay, the reason I got involved in a defense standard, because I would prefer that there never be a war. I got involved because I kept thinking, I had a nephew in the service at the time, and I would think about my nephew out there in the field reaching for something, assuming it was reliable, and having it not work. Shouldering a gun and pulling the trigger and having it not work. Okay, I wanted to make things as reliable as possible for the young men and women that were out there in the field, relying on the fact that they had good equipment. I wanted to make sure they did. And that was my intent. It's not, oh, go U.S., I want to win the war, because I would prefer a war not happen. But I wanted to take care of the people involved.
We had this discussion at work, and it's kind of an easy sell. We just talked about the consequences of failure. Your mouse fails, it's annoying. Your rifle failing is deadly. Same as surfaces in aircraft and everything. It sells pretty easily when you're talking about consequences of failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people don't look that far ahead. Sometimes it's something that's inexpensive that may break, that could actually cause a safety issue. And yet the people, they tend to put the importance of it on the amount of money it costs. And so maybe it's only a $5 part, but if it could save somebody's life, you have to be just as concerned with that as with a $50,000 part.
So on an interesting note,
Is it why not?
I
heard that.
I'm going to shake the bone. When I worked at Purelator, we made a cabin air filter for the P2. And it was designed to hold back enough nuclear particulate that the pilots could finish their mission. Not make it necessarily home. They could fly through a hot zone and complete their mission and drop their payload. Yeah, so some stuff we don't ever have to use.
Yeah. And so that probably would have been replaced after landing, right?
Well, by definition,
They
may not have landed.
Right, exactly.
They dropped the weapon,
Yeah.
and then they could die.
Yeah.
Kamikaze.
Well, when
When you're doing those missions, yeah.
Yeah, there was
So
an
what
old
scenario?
protocol for B-2 bombers, B-17, whatever the hell they had out of their job. The nuclear protocol was they had flash screens in front of the pilot, in front of the co-pilot, and each one of them had individual little flash eyepieces. Go in, the co-pilot's screen was closed, and the main pilot had one eye essentially closed, the glass screen's open. A burst goes off, it destroys one eye. Close that screen, open the co-pilot's screen. Now he's got one eye protected.
Yeah.
Blast goes off, burns out that eye. They go back to the pilot, just one good eye. And so you have 4 retinas burn out before the mission.
Pilots could see, yeah. Like a scrub.
Wow. You'd think that they would sacrifice the co-pilot's eye first.
But it may have been co-pilot. I don't know.
It could have been a toss of the coin. Toss a coin with it. Who's out first, head or tails?
Well, at that point,
Yeah.
just call back and ask the tech sergeant if he wants to fly the airplane. Call that out.
Imagine the bravery if anybody that had to be in that position. That would be pretty rough.
Well, the astronauts framed it well when they were talking about whether they should be manned or not. So the difference between a monkey on top of this and a human is we understand the risk of what's about to happen. So there's a lot of interesting side notes.
Okay, in the following customer's test requirements specification document, it is discovered that there are serious conflicts between the document and the MIL standards referenced in the same document. Describe what, if any, actions need to be taken prior to starting the test. Doesn't show it. So, you have a test spec. Okay, pretend this is paper. I have my test spec, and inside it says, and do this in accordance with MIL standard blank. You open up MIL standard blank, and it tells you to test differently than this one just did. What do? A lot of times you have to make personal contact with somebody and say, what do I do? And then have them put it in writing. I was, stop me if I tell stories a second time, so we already heard that. I was an expert witness in a case for test. I was just shocked. It was a Mill Standard 810 case. And I'm thinking to myself, really? You could take Mill Standard 810 to court? But we had supplier A, which was selling something to the Army. We had supplier B that was selling a subassembly to supplier A, and they could only ship it once their parts were made it up with supplier B's parts. They wrote a test profile. Well, I didn't like the profile to begin with, but that wasn't what the case was on. They wrote a test profile, and so B was trying to follow along with that test profile. But in going back through the reference paragraph, okay, because you know a lot of specifications will say C, paragraph, blah, 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 and you go back to that, A had done cut and paste and forgot to take a part out. Okay, so they take it to court saying B did not do what we told them to do. We told them how to test, and they didn't do it. And B said, yes, I did. It's right here. This is what we did. And I found what had happened because I was the only one that found that cut and paste, where it gave different instructions. So 98% of what B did was what A expected them to, but there was that little bit that had been left in by mistake that B followed, like they should have, because it was in their contractual document. And that blew the whole thing out of court. It never even went, because then A realized, yeah, we screwed up. But that was all over specifications. So, I mean, people used to mock me for reading every single bit of it, from front to back, the references, the footnotes, everything. That's the way you cover your butt. And I'll tell you, as a tester, live by CYB, because there's always people out there that are going to want to blame you for things.